Gerald Malcoe was the town's most trusted gynecologist. Liora Edden was the nurse who risked everything to expose him. For over 30 years, patients walked into Malcoe's exam room believing they were safe, unaware they were stepping into the hands of a predator. What began as quiet suspicions turned into a horrifying discovery of abuse, lies, and decades of silence. This is the chilling true crime story of how one man used his medical license to commit unspeakable acts, and how one woman finally brought it all crashing down. Dr. Gerald Malcoe was a man everyone trusted. For more than 3 decades, he served as the leading gynecologist in the peaceful town of Pine Brook, where families grew up together and everyone knew each other's names. His clinic, the Malcoe Women's Health Institute, stood tall near the center of town. A clean, modern facility, with pastel walls, warm lighting, and a reputation for comfort and care. Women came from nearby towns just to see him. His name carried a strange kind of magic. People said he was gentle, attentive, and kind. Nurses often called him the gold standard for women's care. Mothers told their daughters, and daughters told their friends. Everyone, it seemed, had something good to say about Dr. Malcoe. His office walls were filled with awards, degrees, and photos of smiling babies he had helped deliver. Some of those babies had grown up and returned as patients themselves. He remembered names, anniversaries, even the minor details of someone's first visit. He had a way of making people feel safe, like nothing could go wrong as long as they were under his care. Women often spoke about how comfortable they felt around him, especially in a field that made so many uneasy. Behind the scenes, he was just as meticulous. He always arrived early, stayed late, and rarely took time off. Staff members noticed how devoted he was, how he seemed to sacrifice everything for his patients. There were whispers that he never married or had children of his own, but people admired that too. They saw it as a sign of commitment. His entire life, it seemed, was dedicated to the women he cared for. The clinic itself was designed with detail and care. Calming music played in the waiting room. Essential oils drifted through the air. Female nurses were always present, and patient confidentiality was treated as sacred. Every surface sparkled with cleanliness. Parents felt safe sending their teenage daughters to see him. Elderly women trusted him more than any doctor they'd ever had. And when someone questioned anything, why certain procedures felt odd or why they left feeling unsettled, it was brushed off as routine discomfort or nerves. No one believed that someone like Dr. Malcoe could ever do anything wrong, but he was good at hiding things. Very good. Over time, many nurses came and went. Some transferred without much explanation. Others lasted only a few months before resigning. Still, nobody connected the dots. A few whispered that he was controlling or overly private, but others defended him. They said he was just a perfectionist, someone who couldn't afford to let details slip. And besides, who would question someone with his spotless record? There had never been a formal complaint. Not one. The town of Pine Brook, with all its charm and simplicity, had unknowingly built a fortress around a predator. Patients entered his clinic with trust and hope. Many left feeling something was wrong but didn't have the words for it. Others stayed silent for years, telling themselves it was just part of the medical process. After all, everyone else trusted him. So how could they be the only ones who felt uneasy? No one looked closer. No one wanted to. Dr. Malcoe's kindness, his polished image, and the aura of perfection he built around himself blinded the town to the quiet, invisible trail of victims he was leaving behind. There were no alarms, no red flags anyone dared to follow. He understood his environment well, what people noticed, what they didn't, and how fear and shame kept people quiet. His entire career was a performance so convincing that even his victims doubted themselves, and as the years passed, the silence only grew louder. The darker truths remained locked behind closed doors, buried under decades of reputation and respect. He had created a world where he could do the unthinkable without ever being questioned. While everyone believed they had the perfect doctor, the terrible reality was slowly festering beneath their trust. It would take years before someone would finally uncover the truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. Erin Vass had never forgotten the feeling. It had been almost 10 years since her last visit to Dr. Malcoe's clinic, but the memory lingered like a bruise that never fully healed. She was only 19 then, a college student home for the summer, when her mother scheduled the appointment. Everything about the visit had felt wrong. The way the examination went beyond what she expected. The way she felt afterward, violated, ashamed, but unable to explain why. She tried to talk to a friend about it, but when she mentioned Dr. Malcoe's name, the response was always the same. "He's the best. You must be imagining it." So she kept quiet and pushed it down like so many others before her. She wasn't the only one. Over the years, countless women passed through the same clinic, trusting the same doctor. Some were young and nervous, others experienced and confident. But many of them left with a nagging sense of confusion, as if something deeply wrong had occurred but had no name for it. They told themselves it must have been necessary. They reminded themselves that gynecological exams were uncomfortable, by nature. And they reminded themselves that Dr. Malcoe was a professional, the professional. If anything felt strange, the problem must be with them. Some patients noticed things that didn't add up. Unusual bruising, missing paperwork, exams performed without a nurse present despite clinic policies, questions answered vaguely, but none of it seemed enough to accuse someone with such an impeccable record. And if anyone dared to ask questions, the responses were always polite but firm. Medical protocol, patient confidentiality, or sometimes no response at all. There were others like Erin, who eventually tried to report what happened. But those efforts always met resistance. In one case, a woman submitted a complaint to the clinic's internal review board. The board, composed mainly of Dr. Malcoe's close colleagues and friends, dismissed the concern due to lack of evidence. Another victim tried contacting the state medical board anonymously, only to be told her claim couldn't be pursued without her identity or physical proof. Some women feared their families wouldn't believe them. Others feared the legal process itself, which often turned victims into suspects. Meanwhile, Dr. Malcoe's reputation only grew. He was asked to speak at regional conferences. Local news outlets praised his years of service. He even received a Lifetime Caregiver Award from the Pinebrook Medical Association. Every photo of him holding that trophy, smiling confidently, was a slap in the face to the women who had lived with quiet pain and confusion for years. What made it even worse was how organized it all was. Over time, Dr. Malcoe had developed a pattern. He knew who to target. Often vulnerable, anxious, or first-time patients. He knew how to create moments where no one else was present. The examination rooms had gaps in their camera coverage. The electronic health records were carefully curated. If a patient ever pushed back, he would phrase his explanations in complex medical language, making them feel foolish for questioning him. He wore gloves of professionalism and spoke the language of care, all while violating the very trust he claimed to protect. The few nurses who noticed something was off often left quietly. Some were young and intimidated. Others felt morally compromised but lacked evidence to fight back. A few tried to speak to senior staff, but were either ignored or warned not to question Dr. Malcoe's methods unless they wanted to risk their jobs. Even law enforcement had never received a formal complaint. And without formal charges, no one could open a criminal investigation. Dr. Malcoe was protected by the very system that praised him. By the time Erin decided to come forward again, nearly a decade had passed. She was older, stronger, and had learned to trust her instincts. This time, she wouldn't let her voice disappear, and she wasn't alone anymore. Other women, silently suffering the same confusion and shame, were beginning to realize they hadn't. imagined it either. They had all been pieces of a puzzle too large to see until now. Liora Edden had been a nurse for nearly 6 years before she accepted a position at the Malcoe Women's Health Institute. She had worked in fast-paced hospitals, rural clinics, and even temporary disaster relief centers. But nothing about her new workplace seemed threatening at first. The clinic was spotless, the staff professional, and the patients appeared to adore Dr. Malcoe. During her interview, he was warm and humble, speaking gently about his life's work and the privilege of caring for generations of women. Liora was impressed, even inspired. She felt lucky to be joining a place where compassion and precision appeared to go hand in hand. But within a few weeks, that feeling began to shift. Liora noticed small things at first. Examination Room 3, for instance, was rarely used by other doctors. It was always reserved for Dr. Malcoe, and its scheduling log was often handwritten, not digital like the others. The internal camera installed in that room had supposedly malfunctioned months ago and never got repaired, despite repeated requests. When she asked about it, a senior nurse simply said, "Don't worry about that room, it's fine." Even more troubling were the patient files. Some of them were missing standard notations, consent forms, chaperone signatures, procedural breakdowns. Others had timestamps that didn't align with her own memory of the workday. She remembered being in the hallway when a certain patient supposedly checked in, yet no one seemed to have seen her enter or leave. It wasn't enough to make accusations, but it was enough to raise alarms in her mind. Liora started keeping her own logbook. Quietly, she documented what she saw: room assignments, medication usage, odd patient reactions, and inconsistencies in documentation. On several occasions, she observed women exiting the clinic looking pale, disoriented, or tearful. When she offered help, most of them smiled awkwardly and rushed away. A few mumbled that they were fine, just tired. One young woman whispered, "I don't know what just happened in there," before slipping out the door. None of these moments made sense on their own, but when viewed together, they formed a disturbing pattern. Liora's suspicions deepened after reviewing supply logs for sedatives. The clinic didn't perform surgeries, so the need for high-volume sedation struck her as odd. Vials of midazolam and other calming agents were used far more frequently than at her previous workplaces. When she tried to bring it up with another nurse, she was met with silence. It was as if everyone around her had learned not to ask questions. She considered going to her supervisor, but hesitated. The chain of command was tightly linked to Dr. Malcoe himself. Any internal complaint would likely end up on his desk, and if she was wrong, she would be the one under fire. So, she decided to find help elsewhere. Liora contacted Orrin Shale, a private investigator with a unique history. Years ago, Orrin had been a police officer specializing in medical fraud cases. He'd left the force after a failed whistleblowing attempt nearly destroyed his career. Since then, he'd made it his mission to expose those who use their positions in healthcare to manipulate or abuse vulnerable people. Liora met Orrin in a quiet cafe outside town. She laid out her concerns, her notes, and the unsettling details she had quietly collected. He listened carefully, asked pointed questions, and reviewed the material over several days. The evidence was circumstantial, but it was enough for him to believe her. They decided to work together. Orrin acquired a mini camera disguised as a necklace and placed it on a volunteer, someone trained, briefed, and ready to pose as a patient. The woman booked an appointment under a false name, citing vague symptoms to ensure a private exam. Meanwhile, Orrin monitored from a nearby van, recording the footage in real time. What they captured inside that room shattered any remaining doubt. The recording showed Dr. Malcoe sedating the patient to a level far beyond medical necessity. What followed was deliberate, abusive, and criminal. There were no nurses, no consent, no justification. Liora and Orrin now had what no one else had managed to obtain for decades: undeniable proof. The performance was over. The footage from the eye hidden camera changed everything. Oren Shale knew that what he had in his hands was more than just evidence. It was the key to breaking a wall of silence built over decades. He immediately made several secure copies and reached out to a trusted contact at the state medical board. Liora Edden, though terrified of the consequences, agreed to come forward with her observations and written records. She knew the risks. Whistleblowers were often isolated, blacklisted, or quietly erased from their professions. But the time for fear had passed. She had seen too much. The state board responded swiftly. Though the system was often slow to move, the combination of video evidence, eyewitness accounts, and detailed logs left no room for delay. An emergency inquiry was launched within days. Malcoe was temporarily suspended from practice pending investigation. The announcement came quietly, but word spread fast through Pinebrook. The community's beloved doctor had been removed from the clinic. People were shocked, confused, even angry. Rumors exploded across social media. Some defended him, calling it a mistake or a smear campaign. Others fell silent, remembering old discomforts and moments they had long suppressed. Behind the scenes, a full investigation was underway. Authorities searched Malcoe's office and home, seizing hard drives, medical records, and private journals. What they found added even more horror to the case. Hidden folders were discovered on his personal laptop, organized by year, initials, and medical reference numbers. Inside were photographs and videos, all recorded without consent, showing a wide range of inappropriate and criminal behavior. During patient exams, some of the victims had been minors. The digital evidence painted a clear picture. This was not accidental misconduct or a moment of poor judgment. It was a calculated, systematic violation of trust. Malcoe had abused his position for decades, carefully avoiding exposure by using gaps in oversight and exploiting the vulnerabilities of his patients. He had used medications, isolation, and his trusted reputation as tools. He created an environment where questioning him seemed foolish and where victims often doubted their own memories. As the case went public, more and more victims began to step forward. A hotline was set up by the Attorney General's office to collect statements and provide trauma support. Calls flooded in. Some women were in their 40s and 50s, sharing stories from decades ago. Others were young, confused, and seeking answers about their experiences. Some had always wondered if something was wrong, while others had repressed the memory completely until now. One of the most painful patterns was how many had confided in friends or family years earlier, only to be dismissed, ignored, or told it must have been routine. The courtroom process began shortly after Malcoe's arrest. He was charged with multiple counts of sexual assault, unlawful sedation, unauthorized filming, and breach of medical ethics. The prosecution built a strong case, using the footage, the files, and dozens of victim statements. Malcoe's defense team tried to argue diminished responsibility, citing age and stress. They attempted to question the validity of hidden camera evidence, but the weight of the proof was overwhelming. Throughout the trial, Malcoe showed little emotion. He remained expressionless as victims gave their testimonies. Some cried. Others stared him down. A few couldn't even speak. They submitted written statements to be read aloud by attorneys. The courtroom was packed every day, with news outlets covering the trial and locals watching closely. The man they had trusted with their daughters, sisters, and mothers had been living a double life all along. What hurt the town the most was not just the crimes themselves, but how long they had gone unnoticed. There had been signs, whispers, and quiet exits from the clinic staff. But no one had connected the dots. His charm, awards, and reputation had blinded everyone to the truth. And now, the truth was impossible to ignore. When the verdict was finally read aloud in court, a wave of silence swept through the room. Dr. Gerald Malcoe was found guilty on all charges. The list was long and horrifying. 34 counts of sexual assault, 12 counts of unlawful sedation, and 17 counts related to unauthorized recordings. The jury had deliberated for less than a day. The evidence had spoken for itself. For decades, Malcoe had hidden behind a mask of respectability, and now that mask had been shattered completely, victims wept. Some held each other tightly, relieved that the nightmare had finally been acknowledged by law. Others sat quietly, processing the moment in their own time. No sentence could undo the damage done, but the guilty verdict brought validation, something many had waited a lifetime for. The judge, stern and visibly shaken by the scope of the case, sentenced Malcoe to 175 years in prison with no chance of parole. It was symbolic, yes, but it sent a clear message. Trust violated in the medical field would no longer be protected by silence. News of the conviction spread far beyond Pine Brook. National outlets picked up the story. Documentaries and investigative podcasts soon followed. More survivors, some from out of state, came forward, revealing that Malcoe had worked in other clinics earlier in his career and may have begun his pattern of abuse much earlier than anyone knew. The total number of victims was now believed to be over 60, possibly more. A special investigative task force was assembled to re-examine old patient records from every facility Malcoe had ever worked in. Liora Edden, the nurse who first blew the whistle, received both praise and backlash. Some hailed her as a hero, others accused her of betrayal, of bringing shame to a once revered institution. She remained quiet in public, but continued working behind the scenes, helping victims navigate support systems and advocating for stronger protections in the medical industry. Her decision to speak up had cost her friends, peace of mind, and any illusion that the system would protect the vulnerable. But she had no regrets. She had done what was right, even when it meant walking alone. Orrin Shale, the investigator, also played a crucial role in the aftermath. He began offering training to medical boards and law enforcement on recognizing patterns of abuse hidden within trusted institutions. His approach, rooted in skepticism of unchecked power, was now seen as essential. He emphasized the need for anonymous reporting systems, patient advocacy training, and mandatory third-party oversight in private exam settings. The Pine Brook Women's Health Institute, once considered a pillar of community care, was permanently shut down. Its building was left abandoned for months, a haunting reminder of the crimes that occurred within its walls. Eventually, the property was repurposed into a nonprofit counseling center for survivors of sexual trauma. The new center bore no trace of its previous identity, and its staff included therapists, social workers, and advocates, all dedicated to healing the wounds left behind. In the years that followed, legislation was introduced in several states, requiring that all gynecological procedures be recorded and monitored by independent observers, with strict penalties for tampering. New consent protocols were enforced, and chaperone presence during exams became non-negotiable in most clinics. What happened in Pine Brook had become a national turning point, an awakening to the blind spots within healthcare. For many of the victims, healing was a long and uncertain road. Some returned to therapy, some found solace in support groups, and some simply tried to forget. But one thing had changed. They no longer questioned their memories. They no longer wondered if it was their fault. The truth had been dragged into the light, and for once, the world believed them. As for Malcoe, he was transferred to a high-security prison in another state for his own protection. Even there, he was isolated. Not because of his crimes alone, but because inmates, too, have their own sense of justice when it comes to those who prey on the vulnerable. The story of Dr. Gerald Malcoe didn't end with his conviction. It lived. On in the systems it forced to change, in the voices it finally empowered, and in the broken silence of those who had waited far too long to be heard.